Thank you, guys. We're going to move on to the next panel, which addresses a very, very important topic, how to recession-proof your startup. Katalyst Lab has put together a very, very apt set of speakers to address this topic. During economic downturns and when resources are in short supply, companies must find ways to reduce costs and still deliver on business goals. Reducing your burn rate and extending your runway become critical. To shed light on how founders can engage in recession-proofing their business, please welcome the CEO and co-founder of Metric and my favorite person at the moment, Meenah, Tariq.
Thank you, thank you.
A little biased here, I work at Metric. Reintroducing Mr. Sarmad, Farooq, co-founder and CEO, Truck It In on today's panel for recession-proofing your startup.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Jahan and Disrupt for inviting us. Before we start, I do want to take some time to really ask all of you to give a big round of applause to Muqaddas and Arham from the Connect Here team who've been here all day and they've been ensuring that there is inclusion here at this event. Thank you for doing what you're doing. This is really great. Also, I learned something new from the panel that just happened. I learned a term, it's called revenge travel or revenge tourism. So now I guess Umar, who's my co-founder and husband, will hear a lot of that term. Every time I need to get away, I'm going to be like, this is revenge travel because you've been working me so hard at Metric. But anyway, so we'll just start off. We have a very grim topic to discuss today. And a lot of people have been coming up to me all day today to say, okay, you know, they're looking forward to this because a few startups have already started to hurt. A few businesses, I guess, across Pakistan, not just a few startups. And I guess even globally, businesses have started to hurt because of the global recession and the changing economic situation. And we just wanted to take some time out to discuss what is it that's happening, what is it that we should I guess, look forward to in some ways, if not happily, then, unhappily. And how do we best prepare for it as startups or as the Pakistani startup ecosystem? So with that kind of context set, I'm going to start with Faisal. And I decided what I wanted to ask Faisal was, मैं तो 2008 में बहुत छोटी सी थी, तो मुझे तो नहीं पता क्या हुआ था. आप बताएं, what were you doing in 2008? And what did you see happen in 2008 in the recession that happened in 2008? And then, kind of drawing from that, recession में होता क्या है? Like, हम डरें तो किस चीज़ से डरें? और एक startup ecosystem को recession कैसे impact करता है? Sorry, 4-5 सवाल हैं, but start with where you were in 2008 and what happened, and then maybe continue from there.
So, thank you for having me. It's always an honor. And on to the grim topic. Startups are a part of the overall liquidity and capital markets in terms of how money flows. So whether you're looking at basically hedge funds that are investing in stock markets, are you looking at private equity funds that are investing in more advanced growth stage companies, or venture capital funds that are investing in early stage, at the end of the day, all of us derive our investments from the same pool of investors, which are usually either large institutional investors, family offices. So the behavior is all human in terms of what a recession is. It's a feeling of the collective market. So for example, in Pakistan, we actually always front run global recessions because being a frontier market country, liquidity gets pulled out from the system in riskier countries first. So whether you look at even the pandemic, Pakistan started coming out of it quicker than the rest of the world because we felt the pain ahead of time. So my point of explaining that was that we just went through a recessionary period, and the feeling you have right now in Pakistan with the devaluation of the rupee is linked to actually the dollar's strength. And if I can actually plot it literally on a chart, the Federal Reserve started raising rates, which is the US central bank, similar to our state bank, but the US dollar is a reserve currency, so it impacts the whole world price of oil. They started raising rates in March of 2022, and gradually, every time they raised rates in each meeting, with a lag effect, it started impacting the world because the dollar got stronger. So raising rates means I'm pulling dollars out of the system. and creating a liquidity crunch for
Faisal, if
dollars.
you could just hold on for a bit. Could we have Faisal's mic's volume increased a little bit? मुझे लग रहा है कि आवाज़ थोड़ी हल्की. I don't know if it's like थोड़ा सा और increase कर दें Faisal के mic को.
Is it fine? Can you guys hear me or?
Yeah, better.
Okay. Now I lost my train of thought.
Sorry,
No,
sorry.
So
Interest
basically,
rates increase हो
yeah,
गए.
they're
हम
pulling
गरीब हो
money,
गए.
dollars out of the system. So second, they've actually raised rates so aggressively, meaning pulling dollars out of the system, that it's the fastest in 40 years. And and they were fighting inflation because the last time we had inflation so bad was the 70s, where again it was a whole monetary cycle thing, where until 71 we used to be on a gold-backed system. That was delinked, and then until we figured out what system we were, which ultimately became the petrodollar, there was massive volatility in rates. And in the 80s, US में rate, जो पाकिस्तान का इस वक्त rate है, it was 15% plus rates in the US, if you can imagine that. And अभी जो उन्होंने rates बढ़ाए हैं, we're sitting at 2.5% right now. And I personally believe they're going to go above 3%. So more liquidity squeeze is coming. Now, the reason why I'm explaining all this is just like how you're feeling in Pakistan in a down market, investors in developed markets are feeling the same thing. So many of those people are investors in our funds, they're investors in companies directly. And Sarmad and many of the other panelists here can probably attest to this. The sentiment in all of us is grim, not just for Pakistan, but for the world, because we personally believe that next year, Pakistan is in a recession, the world is going to go into a recession within 6 months. The US is technically saying they won't go into a recession. I don't know, the definition of a recession they've already met. Two contracting quarters of GDP is a recession. But the good news is that obviously out of every recession, you bounce back and come out. So I'll sum up in a simple way that eventually the Federal Reserve in the US has to cut rates. They're going to throw tons of dollars, and that's when risk on is going to return. And when risk on returns, probably in some time tail end of 2023 to early 2024, for any startup, my simple advice would be just survive. Don't worry about scaling and growing and burning money. Hold on to the money you have, survive, and you will actually become the funnel when investors return.
ये कब तक करना है? कितना time survive करना है?
And Sarmad can attest to this. Our advice was at least 24 to 36 months, because you will not see capital
3 साल.
returning. 24 months is about
2 साल.
2 साल.
2 से 3 साल.
It is. So the Federal Reserve, if it cuts rates in June, why did all this happen in Pakistan? In March 2020, they cut rates to 0. That's 0% borrowing. Literally, it was 0.25% was the lending rate. So हर बंदा पैसे उठा रहा था, right? अब वो जो पैसे उठा रहे थे, they were investing in the stock market, making money, putting it in other funds, and then we were putting it in startups.
So अगले 2 से 3 साल हम गरीब होते जाएंगे, फिर उसके बाद वापस अमीर होंगे?
Of course, it's going to come back with, in my opinion, the US is stuck in what I would call the Japan trap. I could be wrong because it's speculative everything. Nobody knows the exact outcome. But they have to keep on printing money. That means inflation, in my opinion, does not go away. It comes up, spikes, comes down, spikes. And inflation actually is good for startups, because basically that means that when there's an inflationary environment, your value is going up too. So try to ride that wave. And so you have to now get used to these cycles. That used to take 7 to 10 years. Now those cycles are going to be more frequent. They'll be happening every 5 years.
Dear God, Faisal, like this is just...
But that's market psychology, right? It's a mature monetary system. So until we end up in a new digital monetary system, whether it's 2030, 2035, that is the future, unfortunately.
सही है. So I'm going to go to Aman next. I think उनका वैसे भी कुछ कहने को दिल चाह रहा है, पर Aman मैं अपना सवाल भी पूछना चाहती हूँ साथ ही, फिर आप दोनों का इकट्ठे जवाब देना. सवाल मेरा ये कि so Aman has just recently joined Sarmad. Recently नहीं, अब कुछ months, it's been a few months. But I think it would still be right to say you are the newest VC partner, like जो किसी fund पे कोई partner आया है. Aman's probably the newest kid on the block, हाँ. और unfortunately आप पार्टी के एंड पे आए हैं बिल्कुल. पिछले साल की जो पार्टी चल रही थी हमारे इकोसिस्टम में, अमान उसके बिल्कुल एंड पे आए हैं, जब सारे लोग सामान बंद करके सब कोरोना भी आ रहा है थोड़ा थोड़ा. तो कैसा महसूस हो रहा है आपको? और आपके ख्याल में मतलब आप लोग क्या करने लगे हैं अगले 6 महीने? अब 2 साल तो फैसल ने बता दिया कि हम गरीब रहेंगे, पर मतलब आपके ख्याल में अगले 6 महीने, अब आप नए नए आए हैं तो अब आप क्या करेंगे क्या इस इकोसिस्टम में आके?
Thanks, Meenah. No, I'll touch on some of what Faisal mentioned as well. But it's been a couple of months since I've moved back to Pakistan, and actually just on the dot landed on the 20th of June. So I was in London for the last 16 years. Initially went to university in a career in investment banking with a number of with a number of North American banks. Again, I've come back with a longer-term view, right? For a life of a VC fund is 10 years. So it was kind of unprecedented that we saw 14 years of cheap liquidity, right? So that asset inflation, many of us who started our careers had never seen a cycle. So as you model a VC fund, you would expect to see a cycle through it, right? So I've come in with a 20, 30-year view on Pakistan, which is, in that time period, will Pakistan be a bigger multiple than other countries? Absolutely. The right fundamentals are in place. Look at any of the other sectors. The transition to digital-first avenues will only going to accelerate. So yes, there may be somewhat of a correction, which I feel perhaps came a bit too early in Pakistan. Say investors had seen 5 or 6 years of growth and then seen a bit of a correction, then that perhaps would have been, they would have trusted in this ecosystem a bit more. So I think on reflection, perhaps a greater sense of realism is perhaps good for the ecosystem. Where things were getting carried away over the last years, the hyped up Silicon Valley model of relying on follow-on funding doesn't quite work on this climate. The part that I slightly defer with Faisal would perhaps be that things are starting to ease up. So I would say 24 to 36 months. If you look at the supply chain crisis, the cost of shipping container has down about 50% since the end of last year. Inflation numbers are down in the US, from 9.1 is down to 8.5%. So I would think the Fed's peak interest rates would perhaps be early next year. And it was all a lagged effect as well. That cheap COVID liquidity had a lagged impact without actually those 2 years of pumping in, then started to see inflation. On top of that, you had the Russian crisis and all the supply chain issues. There was a number of factors that kind of came together. But you're starting to see some of that reverse. If you see some of the results coming out of the US, 40, 50% up, Amazon, Uber's cash flow positive. So I'm a bit more optimistic that by early next year, things should start to clear up. And again, there's enough dry powder. There's 500 billion of dry powder in the VC world globally. So good companies will continue to get funded in Pakistan. So I'm very bullish on Pakistan. There's enough. I've been doing back-to-back across the different cities, Karachi, Lahore, here, meeting founders, investors, as well as kind of hearing the pitches, which is a great sign, actually. It's a very different energy when I speak to my older relatives who moved back 20 years ago versus the ones who were part of this tech ecosystem. So it's a great thing to see. So
I love that you said that, and that's very true, right? As VCs, we are looking at the longer game, and investors in this ecosystem or even other startup ecosystems need to look at it from that longer game view. It's not about the next 2-3 years. It is about the next 10 to 20 years, and Faisal wali baat hai, wo cycle aane jaane hai, ye to upar niche hoga.
And by the way, we're on the same page. I also believe that the rate peak is going to be sometime next year, but the 6-month lag effect, once you calculate it, it actually comes out to Q3 to Q4 of next year. And that's why erring on the side of caution is, like, at least that's what we've told Sarmad and these guys, that keep a 24-month runway, but if things pick up, raise. So we're pretty much on the same page on that.
ये मसला ये ना, अभी सरमद की तरफ ही जाते हैं, और मसला ये 24-month रनवे बड़ा डिफ़िकल्ट है. मतलब ये जिन स्टार्टअप्स ने अभी रेज़ किया है और उनको पता है क्या होने लगा है, वो तो रख सकते हैं, because they have that kind of fresh money. जिन्होंने mid last year भी रेज़ किया था, और उस टाइम पे we were in a completely different world, and a lot of people were not talking about what is about to come, and people were spending money and going. I mean, I'm going to ask Sarmad that question actually in a bit also, but it's just, I guess it's easier said than done for a lot of startups in the room also, and for those that have never raised funding and are trying to raise their first rounds, even though I think overall it's still easier to raise your first round than come up with numbers for your Series A or Series B at that point, but it's still a difficult proposition. Sarmad, I have friends in the trucking, startup ecosystem, logistics space, ठीक है? तो फिर आप बताएं क्या हालात चल रहे हैं, क्योंकि मुझे तो अच्छी खबरें नहीं आ रही और मतलब अच्छी खबरें इस वजह से भी नहीं आ रही कि ट्रकिंग तो छोड़ें, अगर आप उसके अराउंड जो इकोसिस्टम है उसको देखें, दवाइयाँ लेने जाएं तो वो दवाई शॉर्ट है, पैनाडोल तक तो मिल नहीं रही मेरे ख्याल में। एज अ कंट्री हम सब के सर में दर्द है क्योंकि पैनाडोल मिलनी बंद हो गई है, परपेचुअल हेडेक चल रहा है, मेडिसिन शॉर्ट हैं, मतलब जिधर जाएं यू नो कॉन्स्टेंटली चीज़ें शॉर्ट हैं, जिससे आपको पता चलता है कि इसका मतलब है कि मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स स्लो डाउन हुई हुई है, या वो मैन्युफैक्चरर के एंड पे प्रोड्यूस होनी बंद हो गई हैं या सप्लाई व्हाटएवर इट इज़, और आपको पता होगा कि ये व्हाट इज़ इट, राइट? सो क्या इम्पैक्ट आ रहा है इस सेक्टर पे, ऑल्सो कंसिडरिंग कि जो आपका सेक्टर है ये पिछले 6 महीने में बड़ा हॉट सेक्टर था इन टर्म्स ऑफ फंडिंग ऑल्सो, और वीसीज भी हर एवरीबडी वाज लुकिंग फॉर अ गुड लॉजिस्टिक स्टार्टअप टू फंड, एंड नाउ सडनली लाइक all of these things have shifted. So what are you seeing in your sector? What does recession look like in the logistics sector? And maybe what are some things that you're doing to combat it?
I think great question. And if we look at the sector overall, definitely there were a few supply chain disruptions that we have seen. And all the shipping companies and logistic companies were beneficiary of those prices going up. Obviously, the end consumer wasn't. So at this stage, you can still decouple supply chain from the rest of the industries. The manufacturing is going down, the consumption is going down, the trade is going down, but because of the pandemic and then because of the geopolitical situation, there were a few supply chain disruptions that resulted in those prices going up, in which they rightly mentioned in their earlier comments that shipping cost is going down. But still, we're seeing that direction where things will improve and the volumes would go down. But definitely for sectors like us, we are less prone to these kind of changes. This is a sector which move economies from point A to point B. So in any cases, there is a more need of efficiency so that you can solve your cost, and at the end of the day, the consumer is buying it at a lower cost, and then you can also find a medicine that you want it to at all the pharmacies. That's one thing. Secondly, how we are solving this. We had similar kind of experiences once we were working at Kareem. So obviously those were not the economic downturns at that stage, but pandemic did impacted the food industry, it did impacted the ride-hailing ones, and we were those people who stayed there after all the right sizing that Kareem did, post-Uber acquisition. So the kind of mindset that you need to solve this industry, the kind of mindset that is required in this economic downturn, it is like, for example, I use a lot of cricket connotations. So you need to be Babar Azam of these startups because you need to play all the formats really well. So you can't.
मुझे क्रिकेट के बारे में कुछ नहीं पता, इसलिए ये आप इनको बताएं, कोई मुझे बाद में बता देगा बाबर आजम कि क्या.
So basically, it's more about.
आराम से खेलना है और देर तक खेलते रहना है.
It's more about the right mindset and the situation you are up against. For example, if you are a founder, you started with a boom where the market was going up, you were finding capital very easily, but the market has changed, it has evolved. So as a founder, you should have thought that I'm here within this game for the next 8 to 10 years. If you thought about it, that meant that you knew there would be some downturns, not only one, there can be two. Unfortunately, this hit us at a very earlier stage. We were not prepared. But the best part is, as a founder, you always had that mindset, we need to become sustainable at some point in time, and we need to become independent. That's the true, I think, sustainability that we can find in our startups. So I think that was the mindset. And the third thing that I can mention is actually the organizational design challenge that everybody can get into. The kind of organizational design that you required once you were up in the T20 format, once everybody was obviously going at a Shahid Afridi pace or Chris Gale pace. So that was the time you were smashing sixes, all parts of the ground, but now is not the time. So this is the time I think you definitely need to find yourself with better temperament, better skill set, complementary skill set, get your house cleaned up. And now you need people who would be relevant at this stage. You had high energy people who have got potential, who have got direction. They were relevant for that year. So they can smash sixes. But now you need people who can more contain and grow through this journey. And obviously who are focused on more on the metrics that make sense for you at this stage. And last thing for us, which I want to mention here is, a lot of people do think like everybody who started with their startup right from the start they were burning a lot of, like, they were deploying subsidy. That was not the case with us. For example, in the logistics sector. So right from the day one, we ran our company for the consecutive 3 quarters, from the first trip till the next 3 quarters, on a positive unit economics. So right from the start, we focus on the fundamentals, and a lot of people get into this phase and they say, like, we're figuring out the PMF, but then they forget, like, you can't figure out the PMF by only deploying subsidies. So you can figure out your PMF at the early stage once you are not within this race as well. So luckily, we got our first 3 quarters covered, then the market shifted the gears. So obviously, you can't play at a misbah pace, but you can have that temperament.
Sarmad ko cricket बहुत पसंद है, ये मुझे पता चल गया.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a cricket fanatic, and yeah.
I can tell, Sarmad, yeah. I can tell. But +2 for mentioning metrics, okay? Every time somebody mentions metric, I give you +2 points.
Yeah.
Azima, over to you. Sorry.
Metric all the way. Yeah.
Metric all the way. Azima, over to you. So Azima is in a very different sector.
Yeah.
And when I say different, I mean like compared to like the other 3 people here,
Agreed.
who are, none of them are impact investors. Sarmad does not have like a traditional social impact startup. And Azima, you are in the impact sector. So are you seeing any signs of recession at all in the impact sector, or the work that you are doing, considering like, you know, the type of work it is?
Yeah, thank you so much. I absolutely agree with that. When I got an invite for this panel, I was like, don't know if the right fit, but I think it's very important to talk about the impact sector as well, and enterprises like myself that's working for a particular cause and using tech in that area. I feel when we talk about social enterprises and startups, I was talking to a friend and he rightly mentioned that from day one in our core, we are working in a way that we are in recession. So we are very careful about where we are spending, how much money we're putting it, what kind of impact and result that we are getting out of it. The kind of impact that I'm seeing right now, the kind of effect I'm seeing right now in social enterprise space is just like the conventional sector. Yes, there are some startups that are having, you know, trouble just because maybe the kind of solution that they're providing is a luxury, is a solution on top of what's actually needed. But when we talk about startups that are solving issues that are needed, that are like, you know, जो कि पहले कभी solve नहीं हुआ है और उस पे अभी focus किया जा रहा है, you see that policies are now coming into place that are actually supporting these startups to grow even in times like recession. So just talking about ourselves, very recently we had a policy that came from State Bank of Pakistan that focused and told all of the financial sector banks to focus on inclusion of persons with disability. So because this policy came into place, though recession is going on, all the banks have to, you know, dedicate some budget towards it, which at the end of the day gives us our technology support and funding because it's a requirement, it's something that's needed, it's not being solved somewhere else, and we are able to sustain ourselves like that. So I feel that it's again about that luxury solution or a needed solution. Do we have policy in place that supports it? And then at the end of the day, how are we burning our cash? That's also very important.
Zabardast. Thank you so much, Azima, and I completely agree with you. So they've already told me there's like 5 minutes remaining. I don't know कैसे हो सकता है ये, हमारे पास आधा घंटा था. ये कैसे हो सकता है, right? It's not been half an hour yet. So I'm not leaving until like the next 10 minutes at least. So having said that, so I loved what you said in terms of like, you know, dealing with recession. कि one thing that startups can do is दो चीज़ें आपने कही. एक तो आपने कहा कि छक्के लगाने की कोशिश करनी छोड़ दें कुछ टाइम के लिए और आराम से खेलें, कुछ ऐसी बात थी, राइट? और दूसरा आपने ये कहा कि अपनी टीम को रीअरेंज करें और देखें कि आपने इस वक्त किसको आगे करना है, किसको खिलाना है, उन टीम मेंबर्स को, उन लोगों, उस तरह की टीम बिल्ड करें जो इस टाइम पीरियड में जो है वो वॉर टाइम में या सर्वाइवल टाइम में भी थ्राइव कर सके, वर्सेस सिर्फ वो वाले लोग जो वो यू नो अच्छे टाइम पे या हैप्पी टाइम्स में छक्के लगा सकें, काइंड ऑफ, राइट? सो एक तो ये बात होगी. बट फैसल, मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाहती हूँ, एंड देन आई विल आस्क यू द सेम क्वेश्चन, कि अदर देन कि 24 महीने का रनवे रखें, जो कि हो सकता है मेरे पास तो अभी हो ही ना, तो मैं तो नहीं रख सकती अभी 24 महीने का रनवे, एंड व्हाट Sarmad said, what is maybe one other thing that you think a startup can be doing right now to ensure that they come out of this alive?
So it depends what stage you're in, right? If you're an early stage pre-seed, I actually think you might even still get funded because there's enough early stage investors, especially the Meenah investors. They're very cash rich right now. So they're happy to put money in with oil as long as we can get our political situation sorted, because that is scaring people a little bit. But moving on from that, if you're a growth stage company, our advice is basically 24 months, and 24 months starting from May of this year. The reason is because growth stage investors are going to take a little bit longer, in our opinion, to come back to the market. So if you need to raise $30, $40 million, it is not going to be easy to build those rounds. $3-4 million, I think, can be, will be fairly easy to construct.
So, एक तो rounds छोटे भी कर देने चाहिए, right?
Yeah, so you can, there's nothing wrong with even opening up another safe, pick up whatever money that's coming along the way. We've done that for a few of our companies. The 200,000, 250,000, $500,000 type raises go a long way, and you can actually close those so quickly.
Are bridge rounds, right? 250,
bridge rounds,
1 million
exactly.
bridge round kar le.
And I mean, you can't really go for a price round when your revenue is flat, and it's not going to help. So you just open up another safe in the middle. So surviving on safe, calculating your cash flows, make sure that you are not going out to the market 30 days before you're about to run out of money. You want to plan this thing. So if you're anticipating, let's say your runway is out in March 2023, I think it's going to be extremely risky to come out and plan a round in March. You probably want to start looking today, because it'll take you potentially 6 months to close a round in this market. All this changes, in my opinion, at least till the end of next year, if not Q1 of 2024, when you start to see the same type of feeling as 2020, where investors are coming in, and it basically turns into a startups market versus an investors market. Right now it's an investors market.
So you think it's shifted, right? It's become an investors market now.
It's the same as if you're selling a real estate plot right now. There's no buyers.
पर इन्वेस्टर्स मार्केट में एक्सप्लॉयटेशन भी ज़्यादा हो जाती है स्टार्टअप्स की, तो वो भी एक दिस समथिंग दैट अगेन, और अगर आपका अपने नंबर्स और अपनी वो वाली चीज़ें इन लाइन हो, और आप फंड रेज में उस वक्त ना जाओ जिस वक्त आप बिल्कुल ब्लीड करना शुरू हो गए हो, तो ताकि वो शार्क्स आपके इर्द गिर्द आ जाएं, उससे पहले अगर आप चले जाएं तो शायद आपकी बचत हो जाए, वरना अदरवाइज आई थिंक वी आर गोना सी सम
So one of our portfolio companies, they were in that quagmire where they actually have to raise a pretty big round. We sat down, strategized, go to your existing investors first. So all the existing investors gave them a $2 million safe, which is effectively a bridge. And now they're going to be basically profitable, shutting down a few centers here and there. And then when the markets come back, they'll raise again. So also your existing investors, tap into them, they're vested in the company. So they have an aligned interest to effectively write you a check to, as long as you're delivering.
ठीक है, thank you. अमान, सरमायाकार पिछले साल बहुत एक्टिव नहीं था, एक्टिव था पर जैन जितना एक्टिव नहीं था, फॉर एग्जांपल. इस साल क्या एक्सपेक्ट करें हम, क्योंकि एक तो ये मार्केट भी ज़ाहिर है शिफ्ट हो गई है, चीज़ें शिफ्ट हो जाएंगी, डील्स की शक्ल बदल जाएगी इस साल. Are you people still, are you actively investing this year, number one? Because again, a lot of funds are now holding money for portfolio companies. वो new investments इतनी ज़्यादा नहीं कर रहे, वो अपनी portfolio companies की ज़िंदगी बचाने के लिए उनमें पैसे डालेंगे, but like, so they're kind of holding some money back for that. और ज़ाहिर है LPs भी, जैसे फैसल ने कहा कि वो पैसे आने तो सारे उन्हीं अमीर लोगों से हैं सबको, और वो नहीं दे रहे पैसे तो फिर हमारे तक भी नहीं पहुंचेंगे. So all of those things are shifting. So from a Sarmayakar perspective, are you looking at new deals right now? Do you expect to be doing a sizable amount of deals this year? And also, like, what are you suggesting, or what kind of deals are exciting to you, like this year, for example?
So look, last year there was a period of maybe 5 to 6 months where we didn't write a single check because we thought things were getting carried away, and we tend to be on the more conservative end of the spectrum of VC investing, maybe as a function of our investment banking or private equity backgrounds. But we're actively investing. We're considering opportunities this year. You would have seen the One Load announcement that was a couple of weeks ago. That was the Gates Foundation's first investment into Pakistan. There's perhaps a couple of checks that we may write this year. But we actively are investing out of the first fund, and that's part of the reason I'm joining as well, is raising a second fund that we hope to start deploying from next year. I think in terms of sector focuses, perhaps I have a bit of a bias on fintech, given my background in FIG and worked with a lot of neobanks, consumer credit plays in the UK. So from our first fund, we have got Abhi, One Load, Simpesa, which is a payment tech play. So we'll be increasingly want to look at that space because we think it's relatively untapped. And I think I want to add a bit on the question that Faisal had mentioned on as well.
Until they throw us off the stage, John stands up and says, "Get off!" Like
no, I think look, I'm coming in from an outside-in perspective as a relative newbie, and just my observations are 2 cents, and I completely agree with what Faisal had said as well. So depending on, look, if you have 24 plus months of runway, product market fit and unit economics perspective works, then maybe continue to grow. But if that doesn't exist, then really on the cost side, you need to be able to doing a complete self-audit, line by line, really drilling down. So that business mindset, I felt perhaps was lacking in some of the startups. Whereas if you look at the more traditional players, every penny counts when it comes to expenditure. So culture isn't about the shiny offices and the $10,000 coffee machines, but it's about,
पर ये हमारा कसूर नहीं है अमान देखें हमने इस साल के स्टार्ट में जब हमने फंड रेज की ना उसके बाद हमने जो हायरिंग की एवरीबडी दैट केम इन वाज लाइक स्लाइड कहाँ है कोको कोला फाउंटेन कहाँ है यहाँ पे आपकी कॉफ़ी मशीन किधर है क्योंकि वो टाइम ऐसा था कि पीपल वर एक्सपेक्टिंग कि ऑल ऑफ दोज थिंग्स वर गोइंग टू बी अबाउट हमें उनको याद दिलाना पड़ता था भाई हमने बड़े थोड़े से पैसे रेज किए हैं हम गरीब सी कंपनी है हमारा प्री सीड था हम नहीं दे सकते आपको भी स्लाइड और बॉल पिट और वो वाली दुबई में ऑफ साइड फॉर एग्जाम्पल राइट सो या ऑल ऑफ दोज थिंग्स डिड हैपन बट एंड इट्स गोइंग टू बी a hard learning experience, I think, even for the people who've joined startups already to now see a very different side of working in a startup.
No, completely agree.
Sorry, I cut you off in the middle just because मेरी दुखती रग थी मुझे लोगों को बार-बार कहना पड़ता था इसलिए मैं दरमियान में आप continue.
And I think the two other points I quickly want to mention is in this recessionary environment, rather than try and boil the ocean, a lot of startups are trying to build this super app and trying to do too many things. You need to be able to focus on your core business, make it work. Have that kind of product market fit and unit economics positive in that. And then thirdly, I see a lot more consolidation happening over here as well. There's a lot of complementary businesses, partnerships and consolidation should be another thing which sort of increases your runway in these kind of climate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good solution. Again, like when we talk about how do you deal with a recession as a startup, looking for partnerships and consolidations and synergies is a great way. अच्छा जब तक वो हमें उतारते नहीं है मेरा एक अपना सवाल है पर्सनल कह लें ठीक है वो ये और ये मतलब इस सारी डिस्कशन को भी देखते हुए कि हम सारे ये बात करें कि एसेंशली जब हम वो आराम से खेलने वाली बात करते हैं ना तो आपने वो ग्रोथ स्लो डाउन कर दी राइट पिछले साल तक हम कह रहे थे ऐसे जाना है जहाज़ पे बैठ के चांद पे पहुंचना है अब हम कह रहे हैं खैर है कराची तक पहुंच जाएं फिर आगे देखते हैं चांद पे पहुंचने की ज़रूरत नहीं है राइट चांद नहीं आता इतनी आसानी से बट यू नो लाइक हम ये कह रहे हैं बेसिकली कि आप ग्रोथ को स्लो डाउन करें ताकि आप वो रनवे अपना खींच सकें उसी तरह होगा ना अगर आप रनवे को आप पैसों को खींचेंगे आपकी ग्रोथ स्लो डाउन होगी आप मार्केटिंग पे कम पैसे लगाएंगे कस्टमर एक्विजिशन पे कम लगाएंगे लोग कम हायर करेंगे एटसेट्रा एवरीथिंग इज़ लाइक अ फैक्टर ऑफ दैट राइट डर ये लगता है एज अ स्टार्टअप फाउंडर अगर आप ऐसे जा रहे थे और अब एकदम से हर कोई कह रहा है यार ग्रोथ को स्लो डाउन कर दें आपको डर ये लगता है कि आप वो ऐसे करके चलना शुरू हो जाएंगे तो शायद आप वीसी गेम वाले स्टार्टअप ही नहीं रहेंगे मतलब it's a very genuine fear that us founders have when we're talking about slowing down growth because as a VC business like that crazy growth is what was expected of us. So like what do you say to that like that sustainability versus like being a VC style business जो कि aggressively grow करता है और again आपको डर ये भी लगता है कि कोई और आए और वो एकदम वो उसी तरह आए और कल को आप सारे ही VCs कहें यार उनकी वैसे ग्रोथ ज़्यादा अच्छी है और आप ये भूल जाएं कि आपने मीना को कहा था 24 घंटे की 24 महीने के पैसे संभाल के रखें you know so like that's the fear that founders have so what are your thoughts on this वो आगे हमें उतारने के लिए एक मिनट में अगर जवाब दे दें तो हम उतर जाएंगे 2 मिनट में
I'll go look so the idea is to be conservative right in his term pitch pe pani pada hua hai there's no need to try to hit sixes right you're going to end up getting caught or bowled out so the idea is to have cash which is the fuel so if you take your rocket to the moon with no fuel, you're going to run out of fuel. So, and nobody's rewarding growth. So that's the difference between risk on and risk off. In a risk on environment, investors are telling founders to basically burn and scale. I don't necessarily subscribe to that model. I believe in the middle path because it's a 10-year game, 20-year game. But you cannot burn like last year and try to scale because who's going to put the money in? Last year, you guys were raising. 2 weeks may a round would close.
Yeah.
I think that's abnormal. I mean, I don't even think I can get to know a company in 2 weeks. And that was not normal. I mean, my first investment in Pakistan, Faisal was here earlier. Took me 3 months. Umar was my analyst back then. He worked on the deal. It was a long time. That was a little too long, but like at least a month or two you need, right? So I think it's a balance. When the environment changes, be a little bit more conservative, keep some cash at hand, and if things look like they're fine. And by the way, I don't think things are fine right now. I personally think we're in a bear market rally, so people are getting excited. I think in September and oil in Europe in December, people are going to be realize the liquidity is again going to squeeze, right? So just have to navigate the market. That's it. And by the way, nobody knows the answer. I could be wrong, and then you can say, look, you said 24 months.
मैं तो कहूँगी note कर लिया मैंने.
I'm more conservative on because I feel like we're building a business.
I think एक और चीज़ ये भी है कि we have learned so much from. I really want to talk. Okay, so I feel that we have learned so much from the way startups have turned. So I feel now taking it as a learning, we can move forward with knowing that growth is important, but sustainability throughout is also very, very key. And one thing that I actually love about the way we do our business is that we don't completely rely on one product or one service to make all of our money. We put our, like वो कहते हैं ना, diversify your portfolio. Just like that, we have diversified our services. So even if we feel like now in time of recession, one service doesn't make sense for corporations and they might not want to pay for it, there are other services that's making sure that we are sustaining. So even having multiple, revenue streams is also very, very key. And then also ensuring that no matter how quickly you grow, you have that sustainability as core of your business, especially learning from the things that have happened around us right now. And then I feel marketing is such a great tool that even if you're sustaining at this point, no one's stopping you from talking about the things that you did in the past, the growth that you got in such short time. People understand the recession has happened, ab thoda stable growth hogi, but that doesn't mean you can't talk about the successes that happened in past. Everyone will celebrate it with you. I have actually seen that in my business, and I think that's a tip I would give to everyone out there.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. Add something?
So I think last 3 comments. One, obviously, in the specific context of 24 months runway, I think this is a blessing in disguise that we got into this downturn where we can focus on our fundamentals and build an infrastructure that would be relevant for scale once we obviously would be again in that favorable weather and situation where we can enjoy and thrive at that time, and then valuations can take care of themselves at that stage. Secondly, this is a time to build business, not venture. और पाकिस्तानी ज़बान में कहूँगा था कि ज़्यादा उसका impact आ जाए वो ये कि धंधा करना है इस टाइम पे बिल्कुल venture run नहीं करना. And third most important thing is in motorsports there is a famous saying that in order to finish first you must finish. So I think these are 3 things that I wanted to add.
Zabardast. And you're absolutely right. Taking some time, और हमें एक excuse मिल गया है कि हम अपनी growth वैसे ही slow करके जो leakages हैं उठ गई हैं जहां वो जो है ना वो sort कर लें. Thank you so much everyone. Thank you for coming to this panel. This was a lot of fun. Let's do this again.